With Miver's help, Tom spent his first few days setting up his rooms. The academy was a self-contained town in most respects, and together they'd accumulated everything he would need from cleaning supplies to stocking his pantry with the Shorvanti foods he'd come to enjoy, or at least identify. It didn't make his accommodations look any less sparse, but after a few days, they at least felt functional. Not like home yet, but when he looked about himself, it no longer had the feeling of living in a hotel room. Miver was busy loading their study plans into the classroom servers, and while he gained a basic familiarity with the system, she was able to speed through the work. After promising to take a canister of Grinshaw spray, she shoved him out on his own with the task of learning the school for himself. It was time well spent, and Tom wanted the grounds filled with curiosity. The campus was familiar in so many ways. It did seem form followed function. Still, every time he felt himself getting a sense of the place, there were unexpected discoveries. Perhaps the best had been walking along the beach. Since his personal goods were packed away with the library collection, they had yet to be delivered. Given the distance to the spaceport, delivery of the cargo pods packed to the brim with art, artifacts and materials, as well as his baggage and furnitures, still seemed efficient. Even so, it left him living out of his duffel bag for now. That left swimming off the menu, but Tom had always loved the water and long walks along the shore seemed ideal. With faculty and staff busy around the dorms and facilities, it left him alone to enjoy the long expanse of pristine beach. While they diminished, the stares of astonishment, incredulity, and more than an occasional flash of predatory lust hadn't disappeared from the women he passed, and it was a pleasure to get out of his rooms and stroll alone and watch the breakers slowly roll against the shore. He'd been exploring the path along the cove's southern edge when he spotted the entry into the cliff, and curiosity led him inside. The facade seemed to be something like glass, rather than the ubiquitous purple material that dominated Shorvanti architecture. Doors ran across the base of the transparent wall, leaving the natural cliff face exposed, while stone floors opened out onto the rock face. But for the polished floor and recessed lighting, the facility gave the illusion of walking deeper into an entirely natural cavern. "This must be like walking back in time for the Shorvanti," he said aloud, feeling the need to break up the silence, and the sunlight fading behind him as he walked deeper inside. Footlights along the polished stone corridors were the only visible concession to something made rather than natural, but he could feel air gently circulating at what the shield considered an optimal temperature. The place felt like it was quietly awaiting its return to life, the silence around him like quiet expectation. As flickering light drew him down to the end of the corridor, Tom drew in his breath. Passing through another glass door, the natural corridor opened into a wide gallery overlooking a broad amphitheatre set in a vast natural cavern. Seating for 1,000 filled perhaps a quarter of the space, and sloped down to an open stage. Just beyond, ocean waves washed in through a break in the cavern wall to lap against the stage embankment. Overhead, sunlight filtered inside and reflected against countless rock crystals that glittered overhead like stars. Wow. Garnia Cesano had met with Tom once more since his arrival, and tended to call him Miver, so he was unsurprised when his omnipad summoned him into her office. It was an easy walk up from the beach, skirting along the wide green that gave most of the buildings a view down to the open ocean, and he made it there in good time. "Professor Warwick, thank you for joining me so quickly." Garnia closed the door, cutting off the commotion quietly raging in the offices. "Please take a seat. I just wanted to take a bit of your time. I've been speaking with Professor Pelavon, and it seems your cargo should be arriving tomorrow." Tom moved over and took one of the free chairs, and looked about as Garnia followed suit. The head administrator's office was well turned out, much like the woman herself. The furnishings were luxurious, elegant enough for dealing with noble parents, yet practical in a way that said their owner meant business, and Tom enjoyed the comfort of the chair while suppressing the feeling it was sucking him down. I'd have sent you a message, but I also wanted to discuss your extracurricular work. Mivere tells me you want to start a game club for an extracurricular activity. She said it's nothing like video games, but she couldn't explain it very well either. Ah, well, yes. Tom brightened and nodded enthusiastically. Games are very important to both our cultures, so I hoped it might fit in with my classwork if I introduced a game club. You have plenty of athletic clubs, sports clubs, social clubs, and so on, but I noticed you didn't have anything like a game club. I'm not sure you've enlightened me yet, but I have a feeling you're getting there. So these are human games? She said, and arched a prompting brow. Tom was quick to take the point. Despite looking like a bastion of serenity, the preterm week was taking a visible toll on the woman, and her time was at a premium. Well, humans have a pretty wide variety of games. I couldn't begin to teach all of them, and some things like D&D just wouldn't do, but games like Go and chess are very popular in schools all over my world. I thought I'd teach chess, and if that doesn't work, I could try some of the others. Chess is a competitive strategy game, but it also stresses logic, attention to detail, discipline, and problem solving. Ganya settled back and smiled as she considered the value of those skills. That sounds worthwhile, and though I can't swear it'll go over with the students, it certainly sounds promising. And this is something very human? Oh, it's very human. It's a war game, after all. What? Like a combat game? Will you need special equipment? Ganya felt the conversation slipping into another detail to resolve, though privately she had no intention of leaving the offering as anything more than a name and a modest description in the extracurricular catalogue. With everyone vying for places on the diving and combat teams, it might get a few students by accident, but it suited her to minimize Warwick's visibility. The man would be mobbed. That suited her well, as she had every intention of scoring points over Vemi Rasani from the Salty Pan Technical, and one or two other snooty head administrators during the next quarterly meeting. But letting the students find out Warwick was teaching would be enough until he was properly settled. Oh no, it's nothing like a sports game, and all I need are the game pieces and playing boards a bit smaller than that end table there. I managed to find the files on the datanet, and they can be fabricated in a day or two, he said, shaking his head. Really, I just need an empty room with some tables and chairs. Something easy. Well, that makes my day. She nodded with a certain indulgence, as he managed not to add to her list of things to do. So, logic, discipline, and problem solving. All very good, but what is it about? If you don't mind my making the cultural leap, it's sort of like this. Tom thought about the game's history for a moment. Not much is known about the early days of the game. Two princes. Well, do you mind if I call them princesses, just to keep it all clear? Ganya thought over everything she'd heard about human gender roles, and nodded for him to continue, giving an easy wave of her hand. So, 1500 years ago, two princesses fought for a throne in the land called India. Their mother cried in terrible distress at her two children fighting to the death, and begged them to stop the war as much as she could, but in the end, one of the princesses was killed. So, it's a game for territory? She said, trying to envision how such a horrific civil war could create a game. Not exactly. You see, the princess's mother was stricken with grief, and told her surviving daughter she could never forgive the evil thing that she had done. The princess tried to explain how things had really come to pass, but nothing she said could satisfy her mother. So she went to the wisest people she knew and asked how to ease her mother's distress. They told her she could use model soldiers on a checkered board to explain how what happened was her sister's fault, and that was how they invented the game of chess. No, I don't know what it is. Ask him later. Just set it out in order and be careful. It looks delicate. Felicity Markeith was the first Shorvanti Tom had ever met, who he might call robust or curvaceous, in a species that didn't lack for those traits already. Felicity set a new standard. While Tom decided he rather liked the woman, her extra mess made her more than a little daunting once she was set in motion. As head librarian for the academy, the woman seemed to have boundless enthusiasm in her personality, But she was fastidious as she shepherded her staff about, unpacking the cargo pods holding the Academy's new human collection. Librarian seemed an antiquated term, as you can access any textbook through any workstation in the Academy. But Tom learned that each of the dedicated study halls catered to the specialist needs of a different discipline. The library staff were highly educated professionals, caring for the particular study buildings they called their own, but it was an undermining position in the time leading up to the preterm. Their halls were ghostly quiet, and had been cleaned, restocked and shut down only weeks after the prior term ended. With everything in its proper place, Tom could sense the women's eagerness to dig into the collection, after meeting with Velisti and some of her aides. The prospect of putting together an entirely new exhibit for preterm had them positively radiant with enthusiasm, and the meetings where he and Miver showed the more exotic pieces from the catalogue seemed to drive them into a frenzy of curiosity. When the delivery finally arrived, it seemed most of the staff were trickling in to help unload the 4 cargo pods. Since his own things were packed last, they were the first out of the containers, and Tom departed with a dozen of the custodial staff to shepherd his personal belongings over to his rooms. That left a small army of librarians to decant the collection under the watchful eyes of Velisti and Miver. Just take everything from Pod 1 and 2 over for the archives. Yes, that's Pod 2. We'll rotate those pieces in and out at the displays later, called Velisti to one of the newly arrived librarians, pointing her towards the pod on the left. Looking back at Miver, she shook her head. I never imagined the grant would provide for all of this. There's so much, Miver. Neither did I. It was a real stroke of luck when I found Tom, nodded Miver, as she recognized a box emerging with items from Japan. The objects inside were packed in solid foam core that would harmlessly dissolve under UV light, but while the case was sealed, anything inside could survive a bomb blast. Even so, she was fairly certain that was the porcelain and china, so she called over, Please take extra care with that one. So, it's Tom now, is it, Professor Pelavon? Velisti glanced over with a sly smile, though her eyes still followed the younger librarians with care. Each case was listed against the catalogue with a manifest number and picture pasted to the top, and more than once she'd had to break up a curious gaggle of librarians forming around one box or another. Of course, we've been working together for months, so we're on a first-name basis, at least outside of office and class hours. Miver sighed as she looked back from Pod 4. He's very nice, and I hope the rest of the faculty will give him a chance. I thought I knew what Earth was going to be like, but bringing Tom on staff early made a huge difference. We got some things from local trips, some from an online site, and some from a place called Sotheby's. You really can't believe how far an Imperial credit goes, but he still made them stretch. Those are the ones I was talking about, Miver said, as she pointed over to the cases from Japan. Tom arranged several donations. That's one from a university on Earth that I've asked Ganya to partner with. Their head librarian is a lovely man. Miver smiled as that got Felicity's attention, and breezily added, If Ganya gets it approved, I think you'll enjoy corresponding with him. Well, that would be interesting. Felicity didn't quite blush, but she looked at the case with a newfound interest. So, you have the rooms ready for the exhibit? The custodians partitioned it off just as you asked, but I still don't know why you needed to cut off a quarter of the gallery. I know we plan to have some extra pieces to rotate in and out, but we practically need another room. All the last quarter has is a video screen, and the holoprojector you asked for is practically empty. Felicity glanced over at Miver just a bit. Are you sure? No. But the 10 girls who are helping you set up will get to... No, and no. No, you cannot see it early. Miver looked back and gave Felicity an indulging look. Trust me, I understand. Tom wouldn't fully explain the last section, but from what he did tell me, I trust him. Anyway, you can't see it before it's done. The first tour is for Ganya, you, Trissy and her girls from art, and Leva and her girls from the music department. We want your first impressions in case we need to make changes before the tours roll through. I know, but it's not like we aren't already going to shock the parents by putting a man from the sex planet on the faculty. Don't call it that. Mevere looked around quickly, making sure no one was close, and Tom hadn't returned. You know. Yes, Mevere, I do know. That's exactly why I said it, Felicity said gravely, while waving items from the fourth pod over towards the last open area. Most of the parents are going to be curious, but some are going to be shocked, and a few may be downright hostile. It's not like some of them haven't lost a sister or a daughter there. Mevere nodded a bit. Garnier assured her that she had the matter all planned out for preterm day, and once the parents left, things should return to normal. Even so, she couldn't help brooding a little about it. The academy had its position to think of, and it was the one day when families were allowed on campus. There was so much to get right. So, the head librarian at this university, is he available? It was the day before preterm, and the nervous anticipation would have infected anyone, but Tom was particularly anxious as he looked over the exhibit. Standing at the entry, he looked to the 8 faculty members flanking Garnier and Felicity. It was definitely a mixed crowd. Tom hadn't met any of the women, and most chatted to one another and ran their eyes over him with unabashed curiosity. Garnier Sassano stood at the front of the group and gave Mevere and Tom a severe look as she raised her voice. All right, Professor Pelavon, Professor Warwick, this is your big moment, and we're all curious. Impress us. Mevere glanced over at Tom, and they pulled open the double doors together, ushering the group inside. As they'd agreed, Tom walked quickly to the back door in the gallery, while Mevere stayed with Garnier and the others at the front. Watching Mevere lead the tour from his vantage at the rear gallery, it was only close enough to hear the occasional exclamation. A display of opalescent Lalique glass, shining in a lustrous purple, seemed to be a hit. Mevere spent a bit more time over by the Asian display. Several of the art professors took interest in the painted kanji, displaying the word Empress, hung amid a rich display of lacquerware and silk. Meanwhile, Felicity seemed enraptured with the illuminated manuscript of Arthurian legends that Tom spotted for a sale at a New York auction. The librarian looked half ready to break open the case to get her hands on the actual book. Each area had a few pieces on display, next to an interactive display. The musicians lingered over a case featuring a violin and shining flute, and chatted as they waved their hands over controls, bringing forth melodies in genre after genre. The art department seemed just as lost, as they called up Monet's and Jack Kirby comic covers, Holbein's and woodblock prints. Everything received animated attention as the group made its way back for a profusion of exhibits. The replica of the Pieta seemed to be a hit with everyone, and the group paused there for some time, but eventually, Garnier moved over and arrived in front of Tom. And this is the mysterious final chamber I've been hearing about. Polite but audible, the last stragglers had moved over when Garnier spoke up in head administrator tone. So far the exhibit seemed to be a hit, but even Mevere looked at Tom curiously. Tom nodded as he opened the door, leading them into the shadowy room beyond. Yes, head administrator. The presentation rotates every 20 minutes, and it's set to start after a tour group enters the hall and closes the door. You're the very first to see this. Decades before, the Voyager Committee chose not to include images of war, poverty, disease, crime, ideology, or religion, and Tom was thankful for that. Earth had come to be seen as a confusing world of sex and bloodshed, and reinforcing that image was the last thing he wanted to do. It had only taken minutes to record his brief portion and add it to the audio file, and the staff editors promised they'd removed any trace of his accent. As the door closed, a single light shone down on a gold record, and the light slowly dimmed. A hologram of Earth appeared above the record to illuminate the room, and the presentation began. Over 30 short years ago, humanity sent its first spacecraft outside our solar system to interstellar space. We sent it into the void, knowing its speed would require tens of thousands of years just to reach the nearest star. We sent it together. We sent it in peace. About the room, 55 languages began to speak, one after another saying hello. Just as the last greeting finished, music from India spilled over the audience, followed by Beethoven, by jazz, by the song of American Indians. When the first note sounded, the walls began to bring forth image after image. Music transitioned to the cry of a baby, a train, the sounds of wildlife, the wind, rain, and surf from the ocean. Tom only removed a few of the 116 Voyager images. He deleted the pictures for calibration and basic biology, and the directions on how to locate Earth seemed particularly irrelevant. Beyond that, the only image he'd chosen to edit was the touching picture of a man holding his son on his shoulder. Both were shirtless, and with a pang of regret, he pulled the image in closer to only show the man above his chest. It seemed unfair, but he looked at the finished collection with satisfaction. The display began with a view of children, island surf along the Great Barrier Reef, a lighthouse off the coast of Maine, a rider in the desert, a profusion of vegetation, animals of the air, land and sea, and then the parade of humanity, in all its variety. Divers fishing, a Chinese family having a dinner party, dancers, people around a vast variety of homes and buildings. The Taj Mahal flashed by, a view over Oxford University, people working with machines, street scenes, an astronaut in space. The last image to linger was a crimson sunset over the ocean. Then the room fell dark once more, leaving the holographic Earth shining in the center. A child's voice rose. It was the only voice he'd let the narration translate. Hello, from the children of planet Earth.